An old woman has her farm attacked by arrogant cops until her special ops son enters the picture. When six armed police officers raided Mary's small farm that spring morning, they never imagined that the old lady with trembling hands had a son in the FBI and courage greater than all their badges combined. Subscribe if this story finds you and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Mary Donovan gazed out the window of her modest farmhouse as heavy clouds gathered on the horizon of rural Kansas. At 76 years old, her face, marked by time and sun, told stories of decades dedicated to that land. Her knotted, calloused hands rested on the faded windowsill while her eyes, a faded blue but still sharp, followed the movement of the wooden porch beams swaying in the wind. The property, once prosperous, now showed unmistakable signs of the passage of time and financial difficulties. The barn urgently needed a new coat of red paint. The fence that marked the boundaries of the land had several loose boards, and the tractor, once the pride of her late husband, Harold, had remained motionless for months, awaiting replacement parts that Mary couldn't afford. That morning, like every other since Harold's death 5 years ago, Mary woke before the sun, fed her few chickens, checked her small vegetable garden, and prepared a cup of strong coffee, as she always did. The simple routine was her comfort, her anchor in a world that seemed to change too quickly for her to keep up. The distant sound of engines broke the quiet of the morning. Mary frowned. Visitors were rare in that forgotten corner of the county, especially so early. Looking in life's rearview mirror, she had learned that surprises rarely brought good news. 3 police cars appeared on the dirt road leading to her property, raising clouds of dust that contrasted with the darkening sky. Mary felt a tightness in her chest. There was no reason for so many police officers to visit her property unless something was terribly wrong. With slow, cautious steps, leaning on her carved wooden cane, a gift from her grandson last Christmas, Mary made her way to the front porch. She watched as the vehicles parked in precise formation in front of her house, and 6 officers got out simultaneously, as if they had rehearsed that approach. "Good morning, gentlemen," Mary greeted, with a firm voice, despite the apprehension she felt. "How can I help you?" The officer who seemed to be leading the group advanced a few steps. Tall, with broad shoulders and an expression that mixed authority and disdain, he removed his sunglasses with a studied movement. "Mrs. Mary Donovan?" he asked in a tone that suggested more of a statement than a question. "That's me," replied Mary, straightening her thin shoulders under her faded floral cotton dress. "I'm Lieutenant James Harrington of the County Police Department. We have a warrant to inspect your property." He held out an official document that Mary made no move to take. "A warrant? For what reason, if I may ask?" Lieutenant Harrington exchanged glances with the other officers, a smirk forming at the corner of his lips. "We received information that this property is being used for illegal activities, cultivation of prohibited substances, to be more specific." Mary felt as if she had been slapped in the face. In nearly 8 decades of life, she had never been accused of any illegality. "This is absurd," she protested, her voice trembling with indignation. "I only grow vegetables for my own consumption and some flowers." "There's nothing illegal here. That's what we're going to verify," replied Harrington, gesturing for the other officers to spread out across the property. "If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't object to our inspection, right?" Mary watched, helpless, as the police began to search her yard, entering the barn without permission, examining her garden, and even opening the door to the tool shed. "Please be careful with my plants," Mary asked, descending the porch steps with difficulty. "Some are very delicate." "Ma'am," said the lieutenant condescendingly, "we are conducting a police operation, not a visit to the botanical garden. Your delicate plants are our least concern at the moment." Over the next 2 hours, Mary watched with growing horror the methodical destruction of her property. The police officers turned over every inch of her garden, destroying carefully cultivated beds. They tore boards from the barn, scattered hay across the floor, turned over buckets and boxes, all under the pretext of looking for non-existent drugs. When one of the younger officers suggested that perhaps they were being overly rigorous, Lieutenant Harrington reprimanded him publicly. "These country people always think they're above the law," he declared loudly enough for Mary to hear. "They think that because they live far from the city, they can do whatever they want. It's our duty to show that the law applies to everyone, regardless of age or fragile appearance." Mary remained seated on the porch steps, her trembling hands gripping the cane tightly, as silent tears ran down her wrinkled face. They weren't tears of fear, but of frustration and contained anger. Each plant pulled up represented hours of hard work. Each displaced object was a small part of her life being treated with disregard. "Officer," she called out as she saw a policeman dismantling the scarecrow she had made with one of Harold's old overalls. "That has sentimental value to me. Please." "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," the man replied dryly, continuing to tear apart the scarecrow in search of imaginary hiding places. As the day progressed and the search continued fruitlessly, Lieutenant Harrington's mood visibly worsened. Mary could see the frustration on his face, the growing anger at not finding anything to justify that operation. "Lieutenant," one of the officers approached after examining the broken tractor, "we haven't found anything suspicious at all." Harrington shot a furious look at Mary, as if she had deliberately deceived him. "There must be something," he insisted. "The information we received was very specific." "Maybe we received a false report," suggested another officer, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Or maybe," Harrington pointed at Mary, "the lady was warned about our visit and hid everything before we arrived." Mary shook her head, incredulous at the accusation. "I didn't know anything until I saw you arriving this morning." "That's what they all say," Harrington replied with disdain. "Let's keep looking. Check the house." Mary rose quickly, ignoring the pain in her knees. "The warrant allows you to search my garden and outbuildings, not my house," she protested, recalling the numerous times Harold had insisted that she know her rights. Harrington smiled cruelly. "Look at that. We have a law expert here. What are you hiding inside the house that you don't want us to see?" "I'm not hiding anything," Mary replied with dignity. "I'm simply exercising my right to privacy." "Rights?" muttered Harrington with contempt. "It's funny how people only remember them when they have something to hide." The tension escalated when Harrington began climbing the porch steps, clearly determined to enter Mary's house with or without legal permission. Mary, despite her physical frailty, planted herself firmly in front of the door, the cane secure in her hands like a scepter of authority. "You have no right to enter my house," she declared with a surprisingly firm voice, "and I will not step aside." Mrs. Donovan, Harrington was just 2 steps away now. "Don't make things more difficult for yourself. If you continue to obstruct our investigation, I'll have to arrest you for interfering with a police operation." It was at that moment that the sound of tires on the gravel road caught everyone's attention. A black sedan, imposing and official, was rapidly approaching the house. Mary felt a mixture of relief and concern. She knew that the vehicle stopped abruptly, raising a cloud of dust that hung in the air like a curtain. The driver's door opened and a tall man, approximately 50 years old, in formal attire and with a severe expression, emerged with precise and determined movements. "What exactly is the situation here?" asked the newcomer with a deep and authoritative voice as he climbed the porch steps. Harrington turned, visibly irritated by the interruption. "This is an official police operation. Who are you and what are you doing at my scene?" The man stopped beside Mary, gently placing a hand on her shoulder before facing the lieutenant with an icy look. "Special Agent Robert Donovan, FBI," he announced, opening his jacket to reveal his golden badge and identification. "And this scene, as you call it, Lieutenant Harrington, is my mother's property." A heavy silence fell over the group. The officers exchanged nervous glances while Harrington seemed to have swallowed something bitter. "Mother," Robert turned to Mary with genuine concern. "Are you all right?" "I am now," she replied with a slight smile. The first show of relief in hours. Robert turned his attention back to Harrington. "I'd like to see that warrant, please." Reluctantly, Harrington handed over the document, which Robert examined thoroughly, his frown deepening with each line read. "This warrant," he finally said, "authorizes a search of the external premises of the property, based on an anonymous tip about possible cannabis cultivation. There is no mention of the main residence." He returned the paper. "And from what I can see, you've already turned over every inch of the land without finding anything." "We were just being thorough," Harrington defended himself, though his tone had lost all its previous arrogance. "Thorough?" Robert gestured to the destroyed garden, the ransacked barn, the scarecrow in pieces. "This isn't thoroughness, Lieutenant. It's vandalism with a badge." "Agent Donovan," Harrington tried to regain some authority, "I understand your concern, but this is an operation under my jurisdiction. I would appreciate if you didn't interfere." Robert stepped forward, his presence suddenly seeming to fill the entire space of the porch. "Lieutenant, let me be absolutely clear. What's happening here is not a legitimate police operation. It's a demonstration of abuse of power against an elderly citizen who lives alone." "We had reliable information," Harrington began, but was interrupted. "Reliable?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "So reliable that it led 6 officers to destroy the property of a 76-year-old lady without finding a single piece of evidence of a crime." "Sometimes information doesn't pan out," argued one of the other officers, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "True," agreed Robert. "And when that happens, well-trained officers apologize for the inconvenience and leave the premises with minimal disturbance. They don't threaten to invade residences beyond the scope of their warrants, and certainly don't intimidate elderly citizens." Mary watched the scene with a mixture of pride and sadness. Robert had always been a fierce defender of justice, even as a child. Seeing him now using his authority to protect her brought her comfort, but also reminded her of how many other people without a son in the FBI must suffer similar abuses in silence. "Mother," Robert turned to her gently, "why don't you go inside and rest a bit? I'll resolve this situation." Mary hesitated. "I have the right to remain on my own porch, son." Robert smiled, recognizing the determination he had always admired in his mother. "You're absolutely right." He turned back to Harrington. "Lieutenant, your search is over. Your warrant has been executed. Nothing was found. I suggest you and your men leave now." "I don't take orders from the FBI about how to conduct local operations," Harrington replied, though his tone no longer carried the same conviction. "I'm not giving orders as a federal agent," Robert clarified calmly. "I'm informing you as a concerned citizen that I intend to file a formal complaint about the conduct of this operation, including the excessive use of force, intimidation of an elderly citizen, and attempt to exceed the authority granted by the warrant." He paused significantly. "I also intend to request an investigation into the origin of this specific anonymous tip that, coincidentally, led to absolutely nothing." The other officers began to move uncomfortably, some already returning to the patrol cars, clearly wanting to end this increasingly embarrassing situation. "Additionally," continued Robert, taking his phone from his pocket, "I just sent photos of the damage caused to the property to your department's internal affairs office. I imagine your chief will receive a phone call in the next few minutes." Harrington's face visibly paled. "That wasn't necessary." "I disagree," Robert replied dryly. "I believe it was extremely necessary. Now, if you're finished here." Defeated but still trying to maintain some dignity, Harrington gestured for the remaining officers to return to the vehicles. "This isn't the last time we'll see each other, Agent Donovan," he muttered as he descended the porch steps. "I sincerely hope you're wrong, Lieutenant," Robert replied calmly. "For your own good." When the last patrol car left the property, Mary finally allowed her shoulders to slump, the weight of the tension from the last few hours taking its toll. Robert gently guided her into the house, where he helped her sit in her favorite armchair, a relic from better times, with worn but impeccably clean upholstery. "How did you know?" asked Mary, as Robert prepared a cup of tea in the small kitchen he knew so well. "Mrs. Jenkins, from the grocery store," he explained, referring to the neighbor whose property was 2 kilometers away. "She saw the patrol cars passing and called me immediately." Mary smiled weakly. "Berna has always been a good friend, and she knows I'm extremely protective when it comes to you." Robert brought the steaming cup and handed it to his mother. "Now tell me exactly what happened before I arrived." As Mary recounted the events of the morning, Robert listened with growing attention, his professional expression occasionally giving way to the indignation of a son, seeing his mother mistreated. When she finished, he remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "Robert," Mary broke the silence, "I don't want to cause trouble." He smiled tenderly. "You're not causing trouble, Mom. They created it, and they need to be held accountable." "They were just doing their job," argued Mary, always inclined to see the positive side of people. "No," Robert shook his head firmly. "Doing their job would be conducting a respectful and professional search within the limits of the warrant. What they did was abuse their authority against someone they judged vulnerable." Mary sighed, looking out the window at her destroyed garden. "It will take months to recover everything." "We'll figure it out," promised Robert, gently squeezing his mother's hand. "But first, I need to understand why this happened." Anonymous tips about drugs on a property like this are rare, and when they happen, there's usually a reason behind it. In the days that followed, while helping Mary minimally restore order to her property, Robert conducted his own discreet investigation. As an experienced FBI agent, he had resources and contacts that the local police could only dream of, and he was determined to discover the truth. What he found left him furious. The anonymous tip that had led to the police operation wasn't just an unfortunate coincidence or a mistake. It had been deliberate retaliation, part of a much larger scheme involving the expansion of a real estate conglomerate in the county. Mary's property, despite its modest appearance, occupied a strategic position. It was the last parcel of land preventing the construction of a large commercial complex planned by Westfield Development Corporation, a company known for its aggressive land acquisition tactics. In recent weeks, a Westfield representative had visited Mary 3 times, offering to buy her farm for a value far below market price. On each occasion, Mary had politely declined, explaining that the land had been her home for more than 50 years, and that she had no intention of selling. What Robert discovered after analyzing phone and financial records was that Lieutenant Harrington had received a considerable sum in his personal bank account 2 days before the operation at Mary's farm. The deposit had come from a shell company that, after several layers of investigation, proved to be connected to Westfield Development. The plan was simple and cruel: terrorize an elderly lady, destroy her property, and possibly find some excuse to arrest her, all to force her to sell her land out of desperation. It was the kind of scheme Robert had seen many times in his career, but had never expected to find in his own hometown, much less directed at his own mother. On a particularly warm morning, a week after the incident, Mary was on the porch when a luxury car parked in front of her house. A man in an expensive suit with a calculated smile got out of the vehicle, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Donovan," he called with false cordiality as he approached. What a pleasure to see you again. Mary recognized him immediately. Charles Wilson, the Westfield representative, who had tried to buy her property repeatedly. Mr. Wilson, she replied politely, but without enthusiasm. I didn't expect to see you so soon. Well, I heard about the terrible incident last week, he said, climbing the porch steps without being invited. A police operation, from what I was told. It must have been very disturbing for you. Mary studied the man carefully, noting his smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was an unpleasant experience, yes. That's exactly why I'm here. Wilson opened his briefcase with a flourish. Westfield is willing to increase its offer by 10% considering the circumstances. It would be an opportunity for you to start over in a less problematic place. Before Mary could respond, the house door opened and Robert emerged, still wearing the jacket and tie he used for video conferences with his office. Mr. Wilson, he said with a cold smile. What a coincidence, finding you here. The Westfield representative seemed momentarily disconcerted by the presence of a stranger. And you are? Robert Donovan, Mrs. Donovan's son and special agent of the FBI, he replied, extending his hand with excessive firmness, specialized in financial crimes and corporate corruption. Wilson's face lost some color. FBI, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Agreed Robert, with false amiability. Almost as interesting as bank deposits made by shell companies to certain public officials days before police operations on properties coveted by large developers. Wilson swallowed hard, his nervous gaze alternating between Mary and Robert. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure you don't. Robert smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Just as I'm sure your company will be fascinated to learn that I've just initiated a federal investigation into attempts at intimidation and corruption of local authorities in the county. Curiously, Westfield's name keeps appearing in my preliminary research. This is absurd, stuttered Wilson, closing his briefcase with trembling hands. Westfield is a reputable company. Then they have nothing to fear from a thorough investigation, right? Robert stepped forward, his presence suddenly much more intimidating than his polite tone suggested. I think I should go, muttered Wilson, backing toward the porch steps. A wise decision, agreed Robert. And Mr. Wilson, consider this visit as the last time any Westfield representative sets foot on this property. The next person who tries to pressure my mother will find not just a protective son, but the full weight of a federal investigation. When Wilson's car disappeared down the dirt road, Mary looked at her son with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Did you really initiate an investigation? Robert smiled, this time with genuine warmth. Officially since yesterday morning, unofficially, I've been collecting evidence since the moment I left here on the day of the incident. Mary shook her head, impressed with her son's efficiency but still worried. They are powerful, Robert. I don't want you to harm yourself because of me. They may be powerful at the local level, Mother, he replied, sitting in the rocking chair beside her. But they have no idea what it means to face a federal investigation for corruption and intimidation. And as for harming myself, he laughed softly. My career was built dismantling operations much larger than Westfield Development. In the weeks that followed, the small town of Lakewood, Kansas, was shaken by a series of unprecedented events. The county police chief announced a temporary removal of Lieutenant James Harrington to allow a full investigation into allegations of misconduct. 3 days later, the mayor himself called a press conference to announce his unrestricted cooperation with federal investigators in a case he refused to detail. The local newspaper, usually occupied with news about community festivals and school game results, suddenly found itself reporting on FBI agents visiting the Westfield Development Office and carrying boxes of documents. Amid all this turmoil, Mary continued her daily routine on the farm, now with the help of neighbors who embarrassed for not having interfered during the incident with the police. volunteered to help rebuild her garden and repair the damage to the barn. Robert remained in town longer than initially planned, dividing his time between remote work for the FBI and personal supervision of the local investigation. At night, he would sit with his mother on the porch, as they did when he was a boy, listening to her stories and sharing the non-confidential parts of his work. On a particularly pleasant afternoon, while Mary was watering her new tomato seedlings, an official car parked in front of her house. This time it wasn't a police car, but a vehicle from the district attorney's office. A woman of approximately 50, with a well-tailored suit and a determined expression, got out of the car and approached with confident steps. "Mrs. Donovan?" she called respectfully. "I'm Elizabeth Chen, district attorney. I'd like to talk to you if you have a moment." Mary indicated the porch. "I have all the time in the world, Ms. Chen. Would you like a glass of lemonade? I just made some." Seated on the porch, with glasses of cold lemonade sweating in their hands, the two women talked with surprising frankness. "I came personally to inform you," explained Chen, "that we have filed formal charges against Lieutenant Harrington for abuse of authority, falsification of evidence, and accepting bribes. We are also prosecuting 3 Westfield Development executives for corruption and attempted intimidation." Mary listened in silence, her face a mask of serenity that concealed the storm of emotions inside her. "Your son provided irrefutable evidence," continued Chen, "but to strengthen the case, we would need your testimony in court." Mary placed her glass on the side table and considered the proposal for long moments before responding. "You know, Miss Chen, I've lived on this farm for more than 5 decades. I've seen a lot of injustice in my time, some small, some large. I've always believed that the world eventually finds its balance, that people reap what they sow." Chen nodded, patiently waiting for Mary to get to the point. "But I learned from my son that sometimes the universe needs a little help to balance its accounts." Mary smiled, an expression that combined determination and gentleness. "I will testify, not for revenge, but to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to another elderly person who doesn't have a son in the FBI." The day of the trial came amid unprecedented media coverage by Lakewood standards. The small county courthouse was packed, with journalists from state publications and even a representative from a national newspaper occupying the back benches. Mary entered the courtroom, leaning on her cane, wearing her best dress, a conservative navy blue ensemble she reserved for special occasions, like weddings and graduations. Despite her age and diminutive stature, she walked with dignity, her spine straight and her gaze steady. At the defendant's bench, Lieutenant Harrington seemed smaller and less intimidating in his civilian suit than in his uniform. Beside him, 3 Westfield executives, including Charles Wilson, displayed expressions ranging from defiance to despair. When Mary was called to testify, a reverent silence fell over the courtroom. With a clear voice and without hesitation, she narrated the events of that fateful day, describing in precise detail each abuse, each threat, each moment of humiliation. "And are you absolutely certain that Lieutenant Harrington threatened to arrest you if you didn't allow entry to your residence, even knowing that the warrant didn't cover the main house?" asked Prosecutor Chen. "Absolutely," Mary replied firmly. "He said, looking directly into my eyes, that he would arrest me for obstruction if I didn't step aside." During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to paint Mary as a confused lady, possibly with memory lapses due to advanced age. It was a strategic error that the defense would bitterly regret. "Mrs. Donovan," asked the lawyer with exaggerated condescension, "isn't it possible that, with all the confusion of the moment, you misinterpreted my client's words? Perhaps he was just explaining standard procedures?" Mary adjusted her reading glasses and fixed a penetrating gaze on the lawyer. "Young man, I planted and harvested on that farm for 56 years. I saw my husband die there, raised my son alone after that, and survived 5 devastating droughts without a penny of government assistance. I may be old, but my hearing and my memory work perfectly. I know exactly what your client said and how he said it, and I know how to recognize an abuse of power when I see one. A murmur of approval ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge. However, the damage to the defense was done. Mary's serene dignity, contrasting with Harrington's previous arrogance, captured not just the jury's sympathy, but also their respect. 3 days later, the jury returned with the verdict: guilty on all charges. Harrington was sentenced to 5 years in prison, while the Westfield executives received sentences ranging from 3 to 4 years, plus substantial fines. More significantly, the company was prohibited from conducting any real estate development in the county for the next 10 years. The news spread quickly through the small community. Those who previously saw Mary only as the old lady from the Donovan farm now treated her with a new kind of respect. It wasn't just sympathy for a victim, but genuine admiration for someone who had faced power and corruption and prevailed. One afternoon, as Mary worked in her newly restored garden, a line of cars began to arrive at her property. One by one, neighbors, acquaintances, and even strangers brought small offerings, seedlings for her garden, new tools, groceries, homemade items. More important than the gifts were the stories they shared. "They tried to do the same to me last year," confessed an elderly man whom Mary knew by sight from the local church. "They made up an excuse about my well contaminating the water table. I ended up selling my land out of fear of being sued. Our farm was declared an environmental hazard without any evidence," shared a middle-aged couple. "They created so many obstacles with licenses and inspections that we could no longer operate. We ended up selling for what they offered us." Story after story, Mary discovered that she hadn't been the first victim of this scheme, just the first to fight back successfully. 6 months after the trial, on a sunny Sunday morning, Mary was sitting on her porch when she noticed an unusual group approaching along the dirt road. At the front walked the mayor, followed by several members of the town council and dozens of local residents. "Mrs. Donovan," called the mayor as he approached, visibly nervous, "we hope we're not disturbing you." "Not at all," replied Mary, curious about the purpose of this mass visit. "Can I help you with something?" The mayor cleared his throat, clearly mentally rehearsing what he would say next. "Actually, we've come to ask for your help. After everything that happened, well, the town council held a special vote last week." He gestured and one of the councilors stepped forward, unrolling an official document. "Mary Elaine Donovan," the councilor read formally, "it is with great honor that the Town Council of Lakewood requests your participation as chairperson of our county's newly created Ethics and Police Oversight Commission." Mary blinked, momentarily speechless. "We need someone who knows the difference between right and wrong," explained the mayor with uncharacteristic sincerity. "Someone the citizens respect and trust. Someone who doesn't get intimidated by power." Mary hesitated. "I'm just an old farmer. I have no legal training or experience in public administration." "You have something much more valuable," replied a woman in the crowd. "You have integrity. And in times like these, that's worth more than any degree." Mary looked at the hopeful faces in front of her, people to whom she had been invisible just a few months before. She thought of all the other old farmers who might be facing intimidation at that very moment. She thought of Harold, who had always believed that serving the community was the noblest of vocations. "I'll need a ride to the meetings," she finally said, with a small smile. "My days of driving at night have been long gone." A wave of applause and relieved laughter passed through the crowd. The mayor looked about to faint with relief. "And," added Mary with a firmness that immediately silenced everyone, "I want Robert as a consultant to the commission. He'll know what questions to ask and whom to ask them to." A year later, Mary was again on her porch, but this time she wasn't alone. Robert had come to visit her during his annual vacation, and they shared a cup of tea as the sun set over the fields that now flourished again. "I never thought I'd become a public figure at 77, reflected Mary, watching the golden horizon. "I wish your father could see this." Robert smiled, the pride evident in his gaze. "He would be as proud as I am, Mom. You transformed an act of injustice into a movement for real change." Mary nodded, thoughtful. Under her leadership, the commission had implemented new transparency policies for the police department, created an independent reporting system, and initiated training programs on interaction with vulnerable citizens. Most importantly, the message had been clearly transmitted. In Lakewood County, a badge was not a shield against accountability. "You know, Robert," said Mary after a long contemplative silence, "I learned something interesting this past year." "What was that, Mom?" "People look at the elderly and see fragility. They see wrinkles, slow movements, and presume vulnerability." She smiled with tranquil wisdom. "What they don't realize is that each of these wrinkles tells a story of resilience. Each slow movement has been perfected through decades of practice. And when you've lived as long as I have, you stop fearing the little things that intimidate the young." Robert nodded, understanding the weight in his mother's words. "Lieutenant Harrington and those executives made a classic mistake," continued Mary. "They confused kindness with weakness, age with incompetence, and respect for the laws with fear of those who enforce them. It was an expensive mistake for them." From the road came the sounds of more cars approaching. It was commission meeting night, and as always, the citizens of Lakewood were arriving to participate, their voices now valued, their concerns finally heard. Mary stood up, leaning on her cane, no longer a symbol of frailty, but a scepter of moral authority. "As that old saying goes," she concluded with a twinkle in her eyes, "never judge a book by its cover or an old farmer by her wrinkles." Robert offered his arm, and together mother and son walked toward the waiting cars, ready for another night dedicated to ensuring that power would never again be used to intimidate the seemingly weak. Because, as Lakewood had learned the hard way, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is exactly the one everyone underestimated. If you've come this far and this story has touched your heart, I invite you to keep this faith alive with us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any stories that touch the soul. And if this story has moved you, give it a like so we can continue sharing more stories like this one, made with all our hearts. Until next time.